So, as all of us know, the Department of the Interior oversees the vast resources of our nation, including natural resources and heritage, cultural resources and heritage, both past and present. They oversee the relations with the tribes and the tribal nations. They oversee the energy and economic interests of the country. The department itself has a very rich and storied history in our nation, established in 1849, essentially as it was known as the Department of Everything Else. And it has grown to be one of the most important and one of the largest departments in our federal family. Most relevant to us, of course, in the room, the Interior Department is one of the nation's principal stewards of our oceans, coasts, and Great Lakes resources, overseeing vast swaths of our coasts, particularly the resources below the surface. Heading up the Department of the Interior as the 51st Secretary is the Honorable Sally Jewell. Prior to joining President Obama's cabinet, Secretary Jewell served as President and Chief Executive Officer of an organization I think we all know well. I would dare say many of us, if not most of us in the room, are members of this organization, and that is Recreational Equipment, Inc., better known as REI. I am a proud member of REI and frequented stores here in the DC area. During her tenure at REI, it saw remarkable growth, growing threefold during the time she was there. And it is consistently ranked as one of the best companies to work in the United States by Fortune magazine. Prior to that, Secretary Jewell worked in the private sector, 19 years as a commercial banker. She, in fact, is trained as a petroleum engineer and hails from the Northwest. And so really, throughout her career, Secretary Jewell has really had a passion and a commitment to ensuring the sustainability and the sound management of our natural resources. And there could be no better secretary to head the department that oversees all of that for the nation than Secretary Jewell.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks to all of you in the room, and it sounds like there may be a few people that are watching that aren't in the room, so thanks to all of you as well for listening in and tuning in. And the coveted after lunch spot for a keynote speaker is never the favorite time to be up trying to get people who are digesting their food, but I hope you hang in there with me just for 15 minutes or so. I won't take too much of your time. I want to thank Jason in particular and the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation, which there are many people in the room, for your good work, for making sure that we remember the blue and not just the terrestrial part of our planet. I also want to thank Terry Holman with the Interior Oceans team, Lori Faith, who is Acting Assistant Secretary for Insular Areas, which is the relationships that we have with countries and territories in the Pacific and the Caribbean, for whom these issues are really paramount. And also Beth Kurtula, the Director of the Administration's National Ocean Council Office, who's been in the job for about a week, as I gather, with lots going on. As Jason alluded to, I'm a Northwestern girl. I grew up around the water. I grew up as a sailor. And in fact, had the pleasure of being on a business trip that gave me one day back in Seattle on Saturday. And I transited my boat, which was getting repainted through the Ballard locks, and actually got recognized by the Army Corps of Engineers. I thought, you're kidding me, really? He said, "Are you Sally Jewell?" I said, "Are you kidding me? I'm wearing sunglasses, I'm driving a boat, I'm in the wrong part of the country." Anyway, it is something that I miss, but I do get a taste of it here in the Chesapeake and out on the waters. And January 1st of every year, I have a tradition that I've had for more than a decade, and that is I jump in a kayak, and I kayak around Squaxin Island in the South Puget Sound, because there's no better way to ground you. And nobody's out, by the way, early in the morning on January 1st. They're all dealing with other issues from the night before. So I always have it to myself, except for the seals and the great blue herons and the eagles and the occasional fish jumping. And so it's a great way to ground myself. And I've done it in snow and sleet and hail and fog and sunshine and wind and all of those things. But water is part of our soul. It's part of who we are. And we certainly have a president that gets that too. And maybe some of that had to do with growing up around the ocean in Hawaii. and recognizing that being by the ocean is a way to calm yourself, because it is, as I say, who we are. So he created the National Ocean Policy in 2010. You're all aware of that. He proclaimed this month National Ocean Month, which I'm sure is very exciting to all of you in the room. But more importantly, as you heard from John Podesta earlier, he's putting his money where his mouth is in terms of recognizing and supporting the oceans. So you think of interior and you think, well, that's interior, right? That's land, that's terrestrial. And it certainly is, to be sure. But we also are, along with NOAA and other parts of the federal family, an important steward of our nation's ocean, coastal, and Great Lakes resources. As Jason alluded to, we've actually got over 35,000 miles of coastline that my colleagues in the Department of Interior oversee, 85 marine and coastal national parks, 182 marine and coastal national wildlife refuges, and a very important part, Walter Cruikshank's here from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management team, and that is overseeing the energy and mineral development on the 1.7 billion acres of our nation's outer continental shelf. Something that we work hard to do in a compatible way with the oceans and nature. It doesn't always work out that way, as the nation found out in 2010 with the Deepwater Horizon spill. Lessons learned by everybody in that exercise, and certainly the Department of the Interior. But it is an important part of what we do, and it's an important source of energy for our nation's economy. We oversee about 62% of all lands in the United States Arctic. That is a very, very important ecosystem, as you know, both land-based and water-based. So every one of our bureaus and agencies is touched, from the USGS to the Bureau of Reclamation to the National Park Service, Indian Affairs, all play a role in the stewardship of the oceans, whether you think of them in that role or not. But what we do to the land impacts our ocean, and I want to talk a bit about that today. We know that the impacts that we have on terra firma all flow downstream, just by definition, and they end up in the ocean. We see the impacts of agricultural development in the Mississippi Valley impacting dead zones in the water in the Gulf of Mexico. We see oil and gas activities, like say in the Bakken region of North Dakota, impacting the amount of carbon emissions in the atmosphere, notably methane, which is a very harmful greenhouse gas. And that impacts the acidification of our oceans. And I know within John's remarks, he talked about something that's happening in my neck of the woods in the Pacific Northwest, and that is the struggle that a lot of the marine wildlife that depend on calcium shells are for their existence. So the shellfish industry, and of course the food chain is at risk with krill, the animals that feed on those critters, it's all interconnected. So I want to call on the words of a friend who just departed our planet, walked on, as they say in Indian lore, Billy Frank Jr. Some of you may know Billy. There's a few nodding heads around there. Billy was from the Nisqually tribe, but more importantly, he was a stalwart supporter of Indian tribal treaty fishing rights. He was arrested 50 times doing something that he was allowed to do by treaty, which is fishing for salmon, which is an important part of the cultural traditions of the tribes in the Pacific Northwest, but also an important part of subsistence. And then Billy woke up somewhere along the way and said, salmon are disappearing. And it's not just about the salmon and tribal treaty rights, it's actually about ecosystems. And he worked very hard on ecosystems. And I want to read a few words from Billy. He said, I don't believe in magic. I believe in the sun and the stars, the water, the tides, the floods, the owls, the hawks flying, the river running, the wind talking. They are measurements. They tell us how healthy things are, how healthy we are, because we and they are the same. That's what I believe in. Those who learn to listen to the world that sustains them can hear the message brought forth by the salmon. And I think salmon is a great species because it is an anadromous fish. It spends time in seawater, it spends time in fresh water. It depends on healthy ecosystems. It depends on clear passage. And it is an important provider of food to a number of animals in the food chain, as well as one of my favorite meals, and I'm sure that's true for a number of you. So to ignore the interconnected nature of our land and our ocean is to do so at our own peril. And that's what I want to shift gears and talk about what I would say is the defining issue of our time, and that is climate change. I took this job because of climate change. I took this job because in my last day job at REI, where I was for 13 years, I realized that we needed a healthy planet in order to be able to satisfy what our members, like Jason, like to do. And that public lands and waters were very important to that, but the health of those public lands and waters were challenged by climate change. And as a business, how can you, on the one hand, sell gear for active outdoor recreation, and on the other hand, potentially be damaging the planet through your actions? So my colleagues worked very, very hard to say, what is our impact and what can we do about it? And lots of work went on. Green buildings, understanding the carbon footprint of the energy we use, reducing the use of energy using green power, understanding the whole supply chain, what went into products, reducing paper usage, recycling, waste reduction, all of those things. But we realized that we couldn't do it alone, that we really needed all businesses to be working in this way. And there were many, many enlightened businesses, particularly in the garment industry, that are now working together on these things. So what I learned was that climate change is a big issue and everybody has to work together. And it is, in fact, one of the main reasons that I agreed to step out of the private sector and into the public sector and public service. And so I appreciate all of you in the room who are in public service for the jobs that you do, whether you're representing Department of Interior or NOAA or other parts of the federal family. The work that we do is really important. And I understand that more now that I'm here, but I also understood it in the private sector. So in this job, I've taken some pretty amazing trips already in about 14 months in. And I have seen climate change firsthand. So there's just one business trip I took that took me from 70 degrees north latitude to 7 degrees north latitude. I was on the north slope of Alaska in Barrow. I was in Kaktovik, Alaska, where I sat at the airport, which was washing away, by the way, because of coastal erosion. And I counted 29 polar bears. But I didn't count one baby polar bear. That's not a good thing. The 29 polar bears was pretty cool. I've even got video on my cell phone. But the runway at Kaktovik was washing away. Why? Because the pack ice is retreating sooner than it has in years past, and the shoreline is getting pounded for longer periods of time, and that's causing coastal erosion, which I saw elsewhere. I saw cultural sites so important to the people of the North Slope of Alaska and the Arctic that were washing away, that had been there for centuries. I went from there to the Marshall Islands for a meeting of the Pacific Island Forum. And there, the runway was washing away. Why? Because of storms, because of sea level rise, and because the average elevation of the Marshall Islands is 6 feet above sea level. And so they feel it in very real ways, in very threatening ways. And just on Thursday of last week, I was in historic Jamestown, not too far away from here, where we have a Civil War fort that is 50% washed away already because we've lost 98 feet of coastline since maps were kept in that area. There is a point there, and this is, as I'm sure all of you know, this part of the eastern seaboard is experiencing more sea level rise than just about any other part of the United States. There's some also in the Gulf Coast. So they're seeing it in real time. They're seeing more inundation, changing ecosystems, all because of climate change. So in May, you know, and I'm sure John talked about it, the White House released a third national climate assessment, and it talks about some of the major threats we have to our oceans. Rise in ocean temperature, that's changing circulation. It's changing the critters and where they are, and I've seen that in my own home, Pacific Northwest, with different whales than you normally would see, different species migrating north that would typically be warm water fish you'd see in Hawaii now showing up over the coast of Oregon and Washington. Ocean acidification I talked about. Habitat loss is also really critical. And as a largely terrestrial-based organization, we talk a lot about habitat and ecosystems, but I wasn't thinking about the habitat that exists on the underside of the pack ice until I was up in Alaska and understood that that underside of the pack ice is the garden that feeds the Arctic. I had a quick trip up there in March, and the pack ice was breaking up sooner than usual. Was there at the invitation of the Navy on an exercise they had going up there. It should have been 3 weeks long. They curtailed it in 5 days because the ice flow they were working from broke up much sooner than it ever had in years past. So this is happening in very real time and very quickly. And that habitat loss, think of it in developed areas in the United States terrestrially. We don't think of it in the offshore areas that we work on, but it's equally or perhaps more significant, and we don't understand it in the same way that we do our terrestrial landscapes. I'd also say that our economy depends on our oceans and our coasts in many ways. There's the parts of the economy that I talked about earlier, which is people enjoying recreation in the outdoors. And our friends from Hawaii will understand that people largely come to Hawaii because of the blue resources around the islands. The weather's kind of nice as well. But they are very important parts of our economy. The oil and gas industry that I referenced, that Walter and his team at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement work closely with, is a $122 billion industry in the United States, supporting about 732,000 jobs. But our coastal marine national parks and refuges are also an important driver of economic activity. On Friday, after I left historic Jamestown, I flew to the Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge. It was the home tribe area of Billy Frank, who I quoted earlier. That wildlife refuge gets 200,000 visitors a year, and a lot of them young people. And before we dedicated the visitor center at Nisqually, which is why I was there, to the wonderful Norm Dix, a legislator that was a real friend of all of these issues, as I'm sure many of you know, I got a chance to hang with a bunch of kids that were out there learning about the coastal estuary and the importance between the saltwater environment and the freshwater environment. And they were spewing back to me the names of all kinds of plant and animal species and why it was important. And for about 75% of them, their first language was Spanish. But they were learning tremendously from this wildlife refuge. So that was 200,000 visitors a year. We actually host in coastal and marine national parks and refuges 100 million visitors every year. And that supports 77,000 jobs just by itself. So this is part of our economy. And that is a message that resonates with some, if the environmental message doesn't resonate with them, although both really should. So, title of your afternoon is around rethinking business as usual. And I would add to that that sustainability is a team sport, and taking care of our planet and taking care of our resources, blue, green, brown, and otherwise, is a team sport. We can't address climate change alone. I am very proud of my colleague Gina McCarthy and the EPA for making very courageous rules around power plant emissions just last week. You take a lot of heat for that, but I will tell you as a business person that regulation is important because regulation inspires innovation and creativity. Regulation, taxation in some ways, helps us make business choices that actually are aligned with planetary choices on things like climate change. And the EPA did just that with their power plant rule. I will also say that federal government plays a really important role in science. So when you pick up Google Earth to take a look at the planet and take a look at the oceans, I just want you to recognize that it should have a watermark on it that says brought to you by the US Geological Survey. Yeah. So we'll give credit to Google for Street View. But when you pull up and you look at those satellite images, they are brought to you by your tax dollars. They're brought to you by the USGS. And when you, as I do, check almost every morning the Weather Channel on my phone to see what the weather's going to be and whether you wear a dress or a coat or carry an umbrella, that should also have a watermark saying brought to you by NOAA and the National Weather Service. So I hope Google and the Weather Channel are listening, because I have heard people say, well, why do we need the National Weather Service when we've got the Weather Channel? You know, why do the federal government need these satellites when we've got Google Earth? I'm not kidding. I've heard this myself. So people don't get that sustainability and taking care of our planet is a team sport. And there's a role for the public sector and there's a role for the private sector. And many times, as the two examples I gave, the private sector can use the public sector data in a way that helps all of us be better stewards for the planet. And I want to say that both Google and the Weather Channel do that. But we can provide great science. My teammates at the USGS do just that. extensive climate studies that were the backbone of the National Climate Assessment. Climate science centers that Interior has, in conjunction with many colleges and universities across the country, look on a more regional level about what's happening. And we're looking at landscapes through landscape conservation cooperatives on a more holistic level, understanding those interconnections and sharing that information. The Department of Agriculture has science centers as well that have been established to understand the impact of the agricultural community. So I don't think very many people until recent years would have understood that what was happening on farms in Minnesota and North Dakota and the other communities there was killing off parts of the Gulf of Mexico. But we do understand that now because of some of these great investments. So part of what we're doing, besides highlighting what the issues are, is being part of the solutions. And I want to talk a little bit about a couple of those things without dwelling on them. One is that Mother Nature actually has a pretty good idea of what she's doing. And there's a lot that we can learn from her. And we did learn in Hurricane Katrina and Rita that gray infrastructure doesn't necessarily work in the way we hoped it would, that it can become overwhelmed, and that the elimination of things like mangrove swamps and coastal zone buffers or Hurricane Sandy sand dunes and other things that help break up the fury of storms would help us in our communities inland. So in Hurricane Sandy, we took $100 million of the Sandy relief money that was assigned to Interior and said, let's put it out there in a competition and have communities and groups vie for $100 million about building and leveraging natural ecosystems like dunes, like saltwater marshes, like those things that you all understand in this room are so important to many, many parts of our marine ecosystem, as well as protecting communities from storm surges. So we'll be announcing those grant recipients here pretty soon. My colleagues at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, yes, they do work a lot in the Gulf of Mexico on oil and gas, but they are also standing up new opportunities for renewable energy, like wind energy in the Atlantic. So through landscape level planning, they've deconflicted areas for wind energy, avoiding things like critical flyways, avoiding fishing grounds, avoiding military installations and shipping lanes, and have put out for bid 5 commercial wind energy leases off the Atlantic coast so far, with additional auctions happening soon in Maryland, Massachusetts, and New Jersey this year. And there's a lot of people that live right here, so a lot of load right in this area. They're also evaluating proposals for floating wind in the Pacific and wind turbine technology and wave energy research in both Oregon and Florida, as we try and understand how we can harness some of the energy of the ocean without hurting the ocean. And of course, nothing is easy. And so testing it and trying it is the way to understand that. So I just want to say that sustainability and addressing the issues of climate change is a team sport. My colleagues in NOAA, my friend Kathy Sullivan, who I talk to a lot, play a joint role in our oversight of the oceans for the reasons that I described. We work closely with NOAA on all kinds of ocean-related research, coastal hazards, sea level rise, acidification, and so on. The EPA I mentioned earlier, all of us are working together for a common purpose and very much appreciate our boss's climate action plan and his support of regulatory changes that are going to help businesses make smart choices in the future for our planet. So you can't let anybody tell you that any of these issues are easy. They are unbelievably complex. But they are made less complex when people work together across the private sector, across the nonprofit sector, and across the government sector to solve the complex challenges, which is exactly what you're doing here at the CHOW meeting, exactly what you're doing through the organizations you represent. You're engaging with elected officials, which is really, really important, and you are helping all of us craft sustainable solutions for the future. So thank you for everything you do. Thank you for your attention, and keep up the great work. Thanks.